$100,000 in additional fees. Saying that is part of the boardwalk. I think that BI Inc. has invested about $130,000 in that boardwalk. So that was not part of the original consideration back in 2008. That was, all they were going to do was give us the easement, and the city would use our CRA dollars to build the boardwalk. Again, they were not able to do that because there was that prohibition relating to the actual conveyance of the documents, and I think it was the appropriate thing not to do anything during that up until March of 2014. So I think that's kind of a big picture. I think in fairness, we ought to let BI Inc. So convey their version, their side of the issue, and then we have some schematics and stuff that we can show as it relates to what this would look like from an exchange. But in summary, the reason I'm reluctant to recommend it to you is that I don't think it is going to meet the criteria of the state that they have published. They're very strict criteria. My understanding, Mr. Shirley can correct me if I'm wrong, they've only approved one of these during their whole tenure. They actually disapproved one where they were getting in the exchange 2 for 1, twice the amount of square footage. Each of these projects would be standalone on their own merits. And maybe I'm being optimistic, I think there's possibility of us crafting something, but I think as it's crafted right now, we're not at a point where we could proceed with successfully requesting the state to process this application successfully. Again, that's my opinion based on a conference call and meetings that we've had, and I don't know if Mr. Shirley wants to weigh into that issue or not.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention really quickly, I could say a lot, but one thing I wanted to mention that I think I have to say is that in the draft agreement or the proposed agreement, in the preamble, it states that this is a public easement. Currently, it's burdened by a public access easement. The city cannot sign any document ever that says it's burdened by a public access easement, because a private transaction with Mr. Destin for a land exchange will not extinguish a public access easement. So the city, that cannot be in there, and we need to stop talking about that right away, because it's not our opinion that there ever was a public access easement, and the land swap will not remedy that situation. So I wanted to mention that. That's an essential revision. Also, of the 2 spaces, one is handicapped. Keep in mind that one of those spaces is proposed to be for city use only. That is not going to support the land exchange if it's for city use only, if it's not for public use. So we don't know if the state is going to accept the riparian grant. And frankly, I don't know if we can structure that as an easement, since that's a lease and you can't put an easement on top of a lease. I don't know if the state will accept a license for that. When we were at the meeting with the state, we were talking about that, and the attorney that was present was having a little trouble linking that up with the nexus of the recreational benefit during the meeting. And we were going back and forth trying to say, well, yeah, this was part of the original proposal, and that may have done it, but we never did talk about the fact that the rule as written requires that to be uplands. And so we don't know how they're going to respond to that, whether they're going to be able to squint and say, well, maybe we can engage in a creative interpretation of the rules so that we can consider this submerged land to be uplands. I don't know how that's going to come out. But those are just a few of my comments. I have more as we get deeper into it. Thank you.
Okay, City Council members, we've got quite a few people that would like to speak on it. So if it's okay with all of you, let's let the public talk. Mr. Destin and his attorney speak, and then we'll get through those, and then we'll turn it back over to you guys if that's okay with you. Okay, Mr. Destin? I didn't know if you wanted to go first or Ms. Minshew. Absolutely. Okay, first speaker, John Stevens. If you'd like to come forward. Identify yourself for the record, but push that little button on the top. There you go.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. John Stevens with Luther's Pontoon Rentals. I ask that you guys do not close the access road because it could potentially close us and potentially put our staff out of business. And we're talking about staff that ranges from future leaders that are currently in high school and college to new parents to fishing fleet family members. I got retired military and current Destin firefighters that are actually working for us. So we just ask you guys not to close it, and please thank you guys.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Stevens. Mr. Bagby?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Jim Bagby, 4709 Sea Star Vista. I had a couple of questions, I guess, that sometime tonight they can get answered. And I would just encourage y'all to try to continue to work out some sort of agreement for the best interest of the city, for the best interest of the harbor area. But a couple of the questions that popped into my mind is, we keep talking about an exchange, but it's not really an exchange. Maybe legally or technically, we're talking about an easement. So we're not exchanging properties, we're allowing an easement. Maybe somebody can clarify that for me. I had a question about where the parking spots would come from if they weren't down there. So if we have to have 2 parking spots, you know, they have to be somewhere. What's the city's plan for acquiring 2 parking spots? Where would they be? And how would we access them? How would we had talked about, and I don't think we've changed plans since I was up here, but having a bandstand area, a little area to have public gatherings, I guess. How would we access that public area, you know, speakers or things? Are we gonna haul them, carry them down the sidewalk, down the little winding trail all the way? Because that doesn't seem like a good plan to me, just to be honest with you. Somebody that's done a lot of events, that's a pretty far place to call. And then one of the things you might want to look at on the opposite side is maybe talking to the BI Inc. about helping improve or share the cost of improving the access way. And should that property, his property, ever be redeveloped, that there would be an agreement that easement would cease to exist. So it would exist while the boats are there or the pontoons are there and the restaurant's there, but should it ever be redeveloped into something else, the easement would go away. And then the Heritage Oaks, because my last memory is we had like a bathroom over there. That's a bad plan. Since we lost the magnolia tree down on the harbor, we got to do everything we can to keep those Heritage Oaks. And I know a lot of people are upset about the cost of redevelopment or going back and replanting that park, but we should do that to save those oaks. And then I didn't understand why the push now. I mean, this is one of those things, and that's why I guess I would ask that we encourage staff to go back and continue negotiations, because it's not like this hasn't been going on for 6 years, 5 years, whatever it's been, a long time. So thank you, Madam Mayor. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bagby. Dale Peterson?
You know, I've been involved for many years, since the very beginning, with the fishing fleet. Kelly Wines and I went and sat with Royal Melvin to sign the agreement to give us a 99-year lease so we could have the submerged land, we could have the parking, we could have the additional tier for all the fishermen that we've been protecting. You know, in this situation now where the fisheries and their industry is being threatened every day. And and I know that you said that there were some drawings. You know, the drawing I saw of the riparian rights, I just could not imagine that was being asked, and I apologize. I mean, it's literally taking, and I don't know, I wish you could put them up, but It's literally taken 6 of the boat slips or better and of a repair, of submerged land lease, sovereign land that we've had for 25-something years as a fishing fleet marina. And I just, I'm not sure how much of a, all of this doesn't make sense that we've entered into agreement, got money from the state, and then we turn around and we don't put bathrooms in. All the things that I think were promised and part of that grant, I have a hard time seeing how this is even before us. Is the riparian rights is my big dog, the dog that I have in the hunt, quite frankly, and I just wish that y'all would consider, where this started is still where it is. I don't see how anything has changed that we haven't faced for years and years, and we told the state this is what we're going to do. And at that point, it wasn't an issue. And now all of a sudden it's an issue. I don't know what the state does. If they come back and we want our money back, that's something else that we have to consider. Anyway, I appreciate what y'all do very, very much, I might add. And thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mary Ann Wines, did you want to?
Well, I was planning to speak if somebody had questions about the Destin fishing fleet, if the fleet got brought into it. What I've heard the fleet got brought it so far. But there, I know it's coming. They say as a friend is somebody that'll come bail you out of jail. But they say a best friend is somebody that'll be sitting there in jail with you, waiting for somebody to come bail them out with you. And I guess I'm a really good friend, but I'm not a best friend. I just can't put on a mask and watch this. The Destin Fishing Fleet has worked with Royal Melvin starting in the early 1990s on this land. We had a right of first refusal on this land. The Destin Fishing Fleet planned to purchase it. The Schultz family gave us the right of first refusal several different times. Sorry, the Melvin family gave us the right of first refusal. It came through the Schultz boys because they're in real estate. But they gave us the right of first refusal several times, and that never transpired. And then they brought up the city, and we said, absolutely, we want to be team players. We would love to have the city build a park. And so we gave up our right of first refusal, and we were told that it would be a 68-foot park. We were told there'd be no parking on it. We were told that it would begin relatively soon, and it didn't happen. And they closed on the land in 2006, the city did. So it's been 10 years. The price for an easement in the city of Destin on the harbor, based on what I receive, is $42,000 a year. That's what the Destin Fishing Fleet receives from the property to the east of us. That is ingress and egress only. That does not include parking. For 10 years, y'all have not had the benefit of the $42,000 a year ingress and egress. You have not had the benefit of receiving any dollars, and I haven't heard anything talk about that being refunded. In our discussions with Jean Melvin, she has warranted to you that there are no easements on that property. Your land use attorney has warranted that there are no easements on that property. Your staff has answered the question for you. Your land use attorney has answered that question for you. And best as I know, the best real estate attorney in the state of Florida have answered that question for you. And I would ask you the question, if this was Peter Boss, would we still be having this same discussion? Seriously? Dewey Destin's a good man, and he has served his city well, and he has done a phenomenal job, and we're appreciative for all that he does. But in our experience, no easement exists on this land, and to try to give it away is unfair with the agreement that y'all have made with the Destin Fishing Fleet. It's been 10 years. It's time to move on. If you have any questions for me about the submerged land lease later, I'll be happy to come back and answer them. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Lawrence. Okay, Mr. Destin and/or Ms. Minshew. I didn't know who wanted to go first.
That's as high as that goes, huh?
Unfortunately. Sorry. Have to talk loud.
I'm I'm pleased to spend as much time as I have recently with you. I haven't done that much since I was sitting on the dais with you, and at least I had a more comfortable chair then. But hopefully, we can put this to rest and we won't have to see as much of each other. The reason that so many of these questions are still up in the air about the size of the easement and the size, the riparian land and all of that is, it's real hard to mediate with folks who don't stay at a meeting. At the last mediation, and we've been to 3, when we took our lunch break, Mr. Casella and Mr. Shirley left. And that's why mediation didn't go any farther. I've supplied a letter to you from the mediator. I'd like to read it to you because I'm confused about what their position was, and obviously he was too. This letter follows the mediation session last Friday in the above referenced matter, BI in City of Destin. As agreed, Lisa will prepare her client's best offer sometime this week and get it to Scott to be presented at the City Council meeting in early March. To be clear, neither Greg nor Scott will recommend the settlement resolution. They will not actively oppose it other than to say that they cannot support it because of the 2 legal opinions to the effect that the city's position is correct. Now, what I'm saying in this letter does not limit what Scott and Greg can say, but it is my understanding that while neither will support the proposal, they will do their best not to crater it. This letter also confirms that both parties agreed to waive confidentiality in this matter. And the mediator says he's still on standby. The tone of that letter is about reflective of my understanding of what we did. I'm still not sure that we were negotiating in good faith. After all, if the reason that the staff didn't want to agree to any compromise was that the legal opinions they felt were against our position, then those legal opinions weren't going to change at that mediation, which means they went into the negotiation with no intention of negotiating, which is unfortunate. Let me address a few of the questions that were posed by the easement, by the staff's report. Easement grants to BI Inc. We talked about that one, and that one is still negotiable. BI Inc. did not request 2,882 square feet. That figure was submitted by the city, who said the Destin Fire Control District required a 20-foot wide road under their code. Subsequent communication with the district has not substantiated any such requirement. And I think we received a letter from the Fire Control District today. And that letter said, the primary purpose of the fire code requirements for a fire department access road is for the purpose of fighting fires in buildings and structures. The current design and plans for Captain Royal Melvin Heritage Park do not require a fire department access road. However, construction of a building or a structure on this property, now or in the future, will require code-compliant access. It says access for medical and other emergencies should be considered, but is not governed by the Florida Fire Prevention Code. So what they're saying is if the city builds bathrooms, an education center, they will have to provide a 20-foot road that meets the fire access code. A wildlife observation platform and those other structures would be public assembly structures under the city's code. Where will that 20-foot road be placed? We have a road in place right now. As I was saying earlier, BI is only requesting a 1,500 square foot to connect those 2 parking lots. This 1,500 square feet is not in the middle of the park. It is on the western boundary line. BI Inc. has offered to move the road over onto its property up to 3 feet in most areas, which would leave about 7 feet on the property that belongs to the city. However, there is an ADA compliant ramp that the city, during the negotiations, wanted BI to remove in order to move the road even farther over onto BI Inc.'s property. The city had required that we build this ramp in 2011 as a condition of a remodeling permit. The boardwalk easement to the city, which we also talked about, that Mr. Casella thinks we are obliged to grant as of 2014. This is the same ethical issue we discussed earlier. It was a violation of state ethics law for BI Incorporated or me to exchange anything of value, such as an easement for a building permit or a certificate of occupancy. It was also unlawful for the city to require me to violate the law as a condition of a permit or a CO. This is why the city attorney, Mr. Miller, stepped in and stopped these negotiations. Tolling or delaying the agreement for 2 years, which was unlawful when it was negotiated, would still leave me open to ethics complaints. Negotiating a new agreement now would not be unlawful since the 2 years Mr. Casella referred to have expired, and that is exactly what we're attempting to do. The parking easement. Luther's Pontoons business license for the last 5 years has authorized them to have 15 rental boats. As of March the 4th of this year, there were 9 boats on site. We have met with the city staff and understand we asked them what new standards they were applying to Luther's, and we wanted to seek a solution. Ashley Grana said he would find out what parking standard was being used, and we said we would provide additional parking across the street on our leased property if necessary. A record of that meeting can be found at City Hall. To date, the only contact with the city since that meeting is a code violation letter issued last week, 2/29 of this year. I can only assume this is an attempt to create the negotiations over the road park issue. The parking is available. We believe we're compliant, and if we need more parking, we have a lot across the road that we can make available. On the riparian rights for transient boats, that will have to be discussed with the trust people, but I want to correct a couple of mistakes in the city's statement. The state does not own submerged land leases. It owns the submerged land itself. The state then grants submerged land leases to the upland property owners as part of their riparian rights. The 900 square feet of submerged land lease is contiguous to the city's property. The easements, specifically the boardwalk and the proposed handicap parking areas, it is eligibly counted in our opinion, and we will be glad to debate that with the trust folks if necessary. The Destin water users has a water main line under the easement that serves Holiday Isle. The current Heritage Park design requires a shaving down of the bluff's height, necessitating the relocation of that pipe. By keeping that segment of the easement in place, the 7 feet we're talking about, the cost of the redesign should be offset by savings made by not having to move the pipe or regrade the bluff and other significant portions of the park property. Additionally, not regrading the property will ensure preservation of numerous heritage oak trees on the site. We will not put them at risk. I'd like to address for just a moment the land exchange rules versus the changes that have been done in the past. During the lease amendment with Fishing Fleet in 2010, the property located on the eastern boundary of the city's property, the Florida Community Trust has confirmed in writing that these changes were potential disallowable uses, but were allowed and approved by the Community Trust. As you may be aware, the city released 3 of its slips to the fleet, along with granting a 10-foot easement along the waterfront of the park, and they rewrote their management plan in exchange for a release of parking requirements by the fleet. If the Community Trust could approve these changes internally, they certainly can allow us to do what we want to do in the same manner. That would allow us to work out this issue and go forward. And in the meantime, if we are successful, the EEP and the city would receive $1 million plus in benefits. This is not a land exchange. This lease amendment that was done with the fleet was a exchange of easements, precisely what we're trying to do. As far as the road, and I'll try to speed up for you guys, I know you're ready to go home. The road in the Heritage Park is the only deeded access to the 2,000-foot linear park we call the Harbor Walk that the city has. It's the only public vehicular access. Without this access, the city must rely on the goodwill of private property owners along the harbor. All the boardwalk easements I reviewed allowed only access in an east-west, up and down manner and did not allow access across private property. How will the city maintain and repair the boardwalk? How will trucks and vehicles have access to the boardwalk to do those repairs? Our settlement that we have proposed will give the city a non-exclusive easement through our restaurant parking lot to accomplish that task. And finally, I want to make just a brief comment about the Seafood Festival. BI Inc. has always allowed use of our property during the annual Seafood Festival. The VIP tent, the bathrooms, and numerous booths are located on our property. Luther's Pontoons always closes for the weekend and allows them to put booths on his part of the property. We also traditionally cater the VIP tent. If the present fence application is built as it is shown on its drawing, it would extend all the way down the eastern boundary of our property from Highway 98 to within 25 feet of the harbor. This would make it impossible to work with the city and severely impede the public's ability to move up and down the harbor walk during a festival or any crowded time. In conclusion, we are offering to quitclaim our right to use 75% of the access road located on the park property, to close public vehicular access and reroute the city access for vehicles through our lot. We will add the public docking facilities and add handicap parking on our property for the city, in addition to dedicating the Harbor Walk easement and its construction costs that we have already incurred. Do you really want to put up a spike fence that will severely impact the Harbor Walk's ability to function? We recommend that the council approve the amenities we offer in concept and allow us to go in hands with the city to the Community Trust to ask approval in the manner that they approved the changes in 2010 when they worked on the lease modification with the fleet. Construction on the park will not start till the fall at the earliest. We have also included 2 more public documents in the record for you guys to look at that refer to the road easement in question for your review. With that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Minshew. I am somewhat puzzled by the public testimony given earlier about the riparian rights or somehow going to infringe on the fleet's riparian rights. We have not proposed to give any riparian rights that belong to anybody except for us on this exchange. And I'm not really sure about what the other points were they were trying to make. But I'll have Ms. Minshew say a few words to you. And if you have any questions for me, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Destin. Ms. Minshew?
Thank you. Mr. Destin said it all quite well. I'm going to try to be as short as possible. My job is to try to fill in where he left out. I did want to point out that when the city purchased this property, they purchased a title policy for it. And in that title policy, this particular access easement is an exception to the policy. So if there is no possible legal opinion that there's an access easement, why is it an exception to your title policy? Which it is. Mr. Miller wrote it. So we have a claim. We believe there's a public access way and a private access way. I don't know if you all had an opportunity to read my letter. I tried to lay that out for you succinctly and shortly and not too much in legalese, but there are 3 different deeds at least that reference the public access and the private access. I haven't seen anything that would suggest that the city has ever done anything to abandon the public's access. So that raises a whole nother issue. It seems like there's opposition from the fleet. We don't understand that unless they must be planning some larger development that they think that we would affect. All we're trying to do is leave open the businesses that have been here for a long time and to allow some benefit to the park. Whenever you look at the regulations that Mr. Casella has provided us, we finally got those at the last mediation. We kept hearing the state won't allow it, the state won't permit it. And we said, well, let's go talk to them, let's have a meeting. Well, they're not going to do it. So finally they said, well, here's the regulations. So in my letter, I went through it and tried to show you that we would exceed every standard there. But then we went ahead and went further and started having communications directly and looking back at city records, and we find out the city's already done it without these regulations with the fleet. Those were easements that were transferred. There was no land acquired, there was no land exchanged, and there's no land exchanged here. These are only access easements. And so we don't even believe this regulation applies, just like it didn't apply when the amendments were made to the fleet. Those are, if you read those amendments, which I believe were provided to you before this meeting, they all talk about providing access easements and trading parking and trading transient boat slips. They're extremely similar in nature. And the land trust did not require the city to go through this long procedure. Having said that, we still meet it all. We exceed it all by a great measure. We didn't understand why Mr. Casella prepared this agenda item for you when he told us that he wasn't going to recommend denial, which he does here, so that bothered us. Because you try to take a man at his word at a meeting that he's not going to try to undermine the agreement that we've tried to put together. But in that discussion, one of the larger pieces of land is for you, the city, to have access from 98 down to these parking spaces. How else are you going to maintain the boardwalk? How are you going to do improvements to the bathrooms? How are you going to get down there? So we have about 3,000 square feet of an access easement from 98 through our parking lot so that you can get down there to do the work that you need. But he left that number out of your memo. He left that out so that he could show that we were asking for more square footage than we were giving. And that's just not right. We're going to be providing well in excess of what we were asking for. We're just trying to use what we had. And we're trying to keep a business from being shut down with some type of a fence being put up. We were just down there an hour or so ago. The public is still going back and forth and using this. And I think it's going to be a pretty big shock to them when that fence goes up. Just out of the blue, that the city council's decided to shut down the public's access to the water. So I could go on, but I'm not going to waste your time with any more legal details, but to tell you that we would very much appreciate it if you didn't do something so aggressive as putting a fence up when this can be resolved. We've tried to resolve it. We've prepared documents. We just aren't getting any feedback from your staff. They're just not working with us. We're not getting any counteroffers. We want to resolve it. We don't want to go to court, but we will if we have to. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Minshew. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, let me just, I'm not going to sit here and have allegations that we operate in bad faith. Mr. Shirley and I left the mediation after the mediator basically said we were done. He, in his mind, felt we were at an impasse and we weren't going to make any more progress. We did separate at lunch. He came back into the room, went back and forth, so that's the reason that we left. As it relates to allegations that we were attempting to crater the settlement offer, I passed out to you the email that Mr. Shirley provided to Bill Bond, who was the mediator, as relates to what I was going to do as relates to it. Not attempting to crater it, but to give you a recommendation in my best professional opinion about whether or not this exchange met the rule and the criteria that the states laid out. You know, I think it's important to separate the issues with the fishing fleet relating to the, this exchange. The difference is the state of Florida in 2010, we were at our third and final extension of the grant. They wanted us to clear before they would agree to fund. Remember, we purchased this property at the end of 2006. We subsequently did not get state approval on the grant until June of 2010. It took us, we were on our third and final extension. They insisted, because the big issue then was that under the agreement that Royal Melvin had entered into with the fishing fleet in the early 1990s, there was six slips, commercial slips. With that, 15 encumbered the Melvin parcel and 15 encumbered the fleet's property. And that was the agreement. That was the riparian agreement that they entered into. The state would not fund anything that had a private purpose. So that's why we had to remove that parking off of that site, so they would proceed with the funding. So it is an apples and oranges comparison. They didn't approve it. They just said out that they would not provide any funding at $2 million as long as there was private parking. So that was all done. We amended the agreement, they reviewed it, and they were satisfied that we had removed the parking. So there really is a big difference between what is being proposed now and what was proposed back then, because the city hadn't acquired the $2 million and didn't acquire that until in June of 2010, and we did the amendment in April, May of 2010. So there is a difference. So, you know, you've heard from Mr. Boyd back in January as relates to the easement issues and whether or not they have a right, a road, all of those types of things. That's been, you know, the issue. When the city issued the building permit and the subsequent certificate of completion to BI Inc. as part of the restaurant renovations, the boardwalk easement was in consideration. In addition, there was discussions about relocating the access, abandoning and moving over into the middle of the property. We understood that they had paid Gene Melvin prior to the city acquiring the property, I believe from 2004 to when we acquired the property, paid Gene Melvin to use the property. Today, we were able to find actually the executed lease agreement where they paid, and we'll be glad to distribute that to you. So we disagree that they have a right to use the property. We've been consistent in that. The city's land use attorney's been consistent. Mr. Boyd was consistent in that. So saying that, can you do an exchange? You can. Does that require, in our opinion, the state of Florida's concurrence? It does. They're a funding partner in this. When you took their $2 million in 2010, you agreed to do things in a certain criteria. And again, I said from the start, do I think we could craft something that would be acceptable to the state? I think we could. As it's crafted right now, or being presented right now, I don't think it meets the criteria. That's my professional opinion to you. So that's why we've laid it out in this fashion. We did not want to get to a point, but at some point, we now have $1,250,000 restore grant coming to us. We can't complete the design of the park until we know what this issue is going to do to the design. So that's why it is being presented. The next time we can go to the Board of Trustees is in the middle of May, and after that it's in the middle of August. But you got to have everything in compliance prior to you getting there. So the staff is comfortable, and they want to have it 30 days in advance. So the clock is ticking. The state grant, the BP money, the restore money is ticking. And at some point, if we don't proceed with what we committed to the state, we're going to have to reimburse them the $2,007,000 that they provided to us. So it's been a long 10 years. We bought the property in 2006. We got the state money in 2010. We're now at a point where we now need to decide how we want to proceed. So I just didn't want to leave those issues kind of, unchecked or say that somehow we operated in bad faith. We went in there trying to, and I do think we made some progress. I just don't think we've made enough progress that we can say to the state, we think we've got a plan that will work.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Casella. Let's go ahead and see if there's questions from the city council. I'm sure there's probably some, so, Mr. Miller,
Mayor, on 2 occasions, BI Inc.'s attorney has made some representations that overstate my participation and also would induce you to, I believe, lead you to think that I had rendered some opinion that gave credence to the claim of the easement. It's very, for you to understand title insurance, while attorneys or title companies or agents for those companies, those standards for the coverage come from the search accomplished by the underwriter or its agent, and they in fact even produce those documents. Our participation expands their title search work because we may in fact have knowledge they do not have. I can tell you that at the time of this, I didn't have any special knowledge at the time that policy was issued. And there's just a general exception to easements that are not documented. And so I've never rendered any opinion regarding the efficacy of any claim by BI Inc. Or anyone else relating to the property. And I think the representation misguides you as to the effect of that title insurance policy and my participation in the matter. Also, as to the ethics consideration relating to Mr. Destin's participation as a city council member, while he was active as a city council member, I did provide guidance to the city staff that it wasn't possible for a council member to conduct business with his own agency. The opportunity for that to cease was in the hands of Mr. Destin and BI Inc. as early as the end of his term. The trigger was that at the end of his term, he was continuingly the participant on behalf of BI Inc. And so that action by BI Inc. and Mr. Destin triggered the additional 2-year period. Without that, if there had been another representative of BI Inc., that 2-year period would not have applied. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Miller. Okay, city council members, Mr. Dixon?
Yeah, first thing I'd like to say is I really hate getting documents like this during a meeting. If you don't have time to review these things and, you know, we've been provided 2 documents tonight while we're up here trying to listen and meet and everything else, and I just don't like it. I'm going to make a motion and see does it get any traction, but I'm going to make a motion that we have our city manager sit back down with BI Inc. and their attorney, and of course our attorney, and then come up with their best case scenario, and then take it to the public land trust to see whether or not it would even be feasible. That'd be my motion.
Okay, is there a second to that motion?
Yes, that would be to have the BI Inc., along with our city attorney, our land use attorney, our city manager, to sit back down with BI Inc., discuss the proposals that's been put forward, and from that point, let them go, both of them, both organizations go to the public land trust and see whether or not the public land trust would be agreeable to what they were recommending.
Okay.
Trust for public land, I'm sorry.
Trust for public land,
Yeah.
right, I've got that. Okay, is there a second to that motion?
I'll second it for discussion, because I'm still confused. And this is where the confusion is. You know, everybody says there's always possibilities, and I agree with that. The confusing part is you know, Mr. Dixon, I know we have gone over this, and I'll bring up something else in just a minute. But we've already had Mr. Casella and everybody sit down at the table, and apparently we still can't come to grips. It's like, let's go put them in a dark room somewhere and see who comes out. But I personally, over the past weekend, with a third party, went out and looked at the property and figured out that there is a give and take on both sides. I don't know how the land trust is going to work on this. But there is a give and take on both sides that there could be a compromise on a smaller road. I was actually unaware until I was out there that there was a water easement out there with the DW that went down the bottom of the hill and under the harbor. I didn't know we had one there. I thought they all went down Gulf Shore Drive. So I came up with several scenarios and with the third party, and we've kind of back and forth with those scenarios. Yes, they work, and yes, they don't work. The reason that I say that I second this is I don't know if the negotiations with Mr. Casella Mr. Destin and his company would work as much as finding out the truth about what the land trust really wants. And that's the part I like about your motion, Mr. Dixon, is that the land trust, finding out what the land trust will actually want. And because, again, it's all convoluted. And on top of all of that, just quick history, when you go back into the history of Destin and how that land was originally required, back in the day, you did it with a handshake and pooled money, and then the family split up the land in little parcels according to what they needed. And then all you needed was a handshake, and then the government got involved and started saying you had to have deeds and all the other stuff and laws. And so the handshakes went out the window. Where Mr. Destin is coming from that I do understand is years and years ago, there was probably a handshake between the Melvin family and who originally owned the property next door at the time before Mr. Destin bought it, which I believe was one of my former relatives who passed away many moons ago. And that was a handshake. Then you get the agreement with the fishing fleet in 1993, where again, although it was legal, there was also a handshake involved, because at the time we had a situation where the fishing fleet was being pushed from one property to another, and so they acquired all the land they needed to do the fishing fleet as it just stands today. And then lastly, Mr. Destin brought up an interesting argument with a fence. I'm not happy with spike fences. Somebody did that down at the what we now call Harbor Walk, but at the time was called the Kelly Boat Services. Somebody did that once, and then that caused a lot of bad blood. And under today, what we're trying to do to the harbor, we don't need the bad blood. We want everybody to be participating. And there's got to be a way to do it, and everybody come out on the high side and be happy. I don't know where this motion is going to go, but I'll stay with the second for now until we see any other discussion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Muller. Ms. Ramswell?
Thank you, Mayor. I have actually quite a few questions. I wanted to start off with the items presented in our agenda packet. Well, I guess that's not where I want to start. I'm actually disappointed to hear that mediation ended up not really being a mediation. That was our direction. It was to go and then come and report back to us. And
that's exactly what's happening here. We mediated, we reached an impasse, and we told the mediator that I would not recommend what they were offering, but they had a right to come and report to you. So that's what's happening tonight.
right, well, in reading the letter from the mediator, it's saying that the two of you actually entered the mediation session already of the mind that the two opinions, Mr. Shirley and Mr. Boyd, were already set in stone. So what's the point in mediation when that's the opinion you're holding going into the meeting?
Well, we can't, number one, if I have that opinion, it's not going to change my opinion just because I'm ordered into mediation. But we need what you call direction. And we cannot in good conscience recommend a resolution. We can get an offer on the table, which is what we did. This is the first concrete offer that's been made. Well, we got that offer on the table. We're bringing it back, letting the city council look at it. If the city council now says, we're going to give you direction, and the direction is we would like you to attempt to consummate this transaction, then we will go forward and we will do that. So that's what we need out of you. Because I have previously given an opinion that BI did not have rights of access across the city parcel, it made it very difficult for me to consummate that transaction without additional input from the city council. So that's why we're here.
And we wanted...
That's why I'm here in this mode.
Again, I just want to add, I do think there's a way to get this issue resolved. And that's why we're laid it out in the rules. You know, if whatever that number is that they need for the access in the middle of the park on the western side, if there's an exchange down on the water side, plus the riparian, I think we've got a plan that we could convince the state on. Okay? That number went from 2,882 square feet now down to 1,500. I don't know what that number is, but whatever that number is, I believe if we got equal to or greater square foot down on the water side, that would pass the straight face test. I think we could convince the Community Land Trust, along with the riparian, that there's benefits to doing the transaction, and we can call it a day. I don't think anybody wants, to build a fence, a spike fence, or any of that. We want this issue resolved. I was the one that suggested to Mr. Destin back in the summer that we go to mediation. So I've been trying to figure out a way to avoid this issue. This issue's been around now from, since 2010. We need to get it resolved. We need to get the park. I think everybody understands the importance of the park as being a gateway. We don't plan to kill any trees. That's never been part of the transaction. We're going to get, the park with the bathrooms, all of that. We've got the money to do it. It's going to be first class. We just need to work out this issue. And again, I don't have a problem going back to mediation, but in my opinion, that I think the state's going to look for whatever we're giving up in the middle is getting equal to square footage down on the thing. If that's something they can live with, I think we can wrap that up. But if it's going to include the boardwalk, I think that's a separate transaction. But if we can work that out tonight, then I think that if they're agreeable to that, I think we can get this thing packaged up and done. So I'll point to Mr. Destin and see if that can be done. So.
I think that we can resolve that issue. I think we have more than enough with the access through our parking lot, the handicap parking, and, we'll start back to negotiating tomorrow morning if that's what it takes. We're willing to get this issue behind us too, because we want to try to solve it and do the benefits that we are trying to give to the city. So, we're willing to work.
Okay, Ms. Ramswell, do you have any other
I
comments?
do.
Okay.
We keep talking about, and I see in here in the packet, there's discussion of putting up a fence. Has that permit already been applied for?
Yes,
When was that applied for?
probably earlier this year.
So without our direction
There was
and without us discussing mediation or?
No, there was a discussion about building the fence. There was a substitute motion made to try to mediation.
Right.
So that was done. So pulling the permit, all that did was put us in a position, if the city council wanted to proceed, we were not going to build the fence without the city council's, approval.
Okay. There keeps being discussions surrounding the fact that whether there's an easement, and people are, no, there's no easement. Yes, there is an easement, and I believe you said that y'all have always held that there's never been an easement over there. Did I hear that correctly, that you just?
We have provided you in the past, Mr. Shirley and his partner's legal opinion as relates to the easements and the allegations that there's easements there. There is easements. There was easements, an 8-foot easement on the west side of the property, 2 8-foot easements, and then there's the Destin water user easements that's been in place for the water line. So that easement was in place, and that was noted on the surveys and noted in the title policy. Translating that to that BI Inc. has a right to use the city property is where we disagree. And if you remember what Mr. Boyd said, those easements, they did exist, but they're now exhausted. That was Mr. Shirley's opinion and his partner, and Mr. Boyd's opinion. The agreement and I apologize to Tuffy for passing it. I just got this. We've been looking for this document from, we had heard that it existed between Mrs. Melvin and BI Inc. But this is an agreement that was in place. And if you read the preamble to that, it says that BI Inc. has no legal access to its property from Highway 98. And they entered into this agreement and they paid Gene Melvin for about 2.5 years until we bought the property, $500 a month.
Can I interrupt here?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, but I don't know where the rest of you were, but I just heard something very significant. And it was the fact that Mr. Casella was making statements, And Mr. Destin said, I think we can come to some agreements. And if I were a voting member on this city council, I would probably quit debating all these issues and let them do just that, and we move on. Hold on, wait. Can't allow this clapping, but rather than keep pushing this, I think that you heard that. Now, it's up to you guys to decide whether or not you want to keep this discussion going or you want to let them work this out. So,
Could one of us get a chance to talk every once in a while, you know? By the time it gets to me, the war's over.
well, let's just talk about, let's just ask the specific questions. We don't need to beat up on staff for not doing whatever. Let's move on. So, Ms. Ramswell, do you have other questions specific to?
Sure. Well, I mean, my main concern is all this back and forth, the he say, she say, and the fact that we have reached a point where we're trying to discuss give and take, right? We're talking about with the land trust, we're talking about what will they accept, what are they not going to accept. And I think what we're looking at right here is an offer, as we've all seen on paper, of property and rights and all sorts of things totaling $1.4 million, which is a fantastic value. And I don't think that's something that, you know, we can avoid. I think this is something we need to jump and grab and continue the mediation because, you know, you look at the other agreements that are in place and they actually, we've been giving things away. So this seems like a no-brainer in terms of we're going to be getting things, which is wonderful. This is supposed to be benefiting the community, and this is exactly what Mr. Destin is presenting. And so I think absolutely we need to be jumping on this, but there's a motion on the floor already, so I can't be making another one with one on the floor.
You can.
That's what I've been told.
No, ma'am, you can make a substitute motion, absolutely. If
Well,
that's what
good.
you'd
I will
like
make
to
a
do.
substitute motion that pursuant to Mr. Casella and Mr. Destin's suggestion that we have one more stab at mediation and try to move this thing along and, yeah, move it. I can't even be eloquent on this because it's very frustrating that we're at this point, but
I think that would be kind of what Mr. Dixon's motion was to sit them all down in the room.
That was Mr. Dixon's motion, as I understood it,
Yeah.
was that we were to sit down and work out.
Quiet, everybody, please.
Work out the remainder of the terms and then go to DEP and see
Trust for
if they would
Public
accept that transaction. I mean, because nothing goes any further unless it's a transaction that the state will accept. So we need to sit down, and it takes it one step past what you're discussing, Councilor Ramswell.
Yeah, it
because
takes it,
it
same thing,
takes
but
it to the
taking it
point
one
where we
step
go to the
further.
state and see
right.
if the
Well, I
state will
guess my
accept it.
question then is, if this is not a land exchange, if we're looking at it as was presented earlier,
Councilman?
that's a
No.
different.
Come on,
No, it's-
everybody, please.
If I
We
could
need to
clar-
maintain order.
DEP made it very clear that it has to be a land exchange. Okay, so we are not going to sneak around shooting easements back and forth with BI Inc., or I'm not going to recommend it, and then have them find out about it after the fact and have the Attorney General investigating why we did that. So
Sure, that's not what I was
we're just not going to do
suggesting.
that. So
And
it
we've-
has to be a land exchange. It
and
all
we've-
has to be above board and out in the open.
And we've tried to be transparent with them about what we were trying to accomplish, and they laid it out, and they said it was doable. It's not easy, but it was doable. So that's, and I've said, do I think we can get to, if it was, whatever they need up on the top, they give us on the bottom, I think we can present that with the right parent, and we can call it a day. But
Okay,
what's
that's-
offered is not that.
So, Ms.
Perfect.
Ramsell, is that good for you as far as?
Absolutely.
Okay.
If the legal guidance is that we, as part of this process, whether it's a land swap or whatever it may be, if we still need to go to DEP ahead of the time, absolutely, then I'll remove my motion and we'll go with the original motion.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Ramswell. Mr. Foreman, we've got several speakers, but keep in mind, in the spirit of what the motion is on the floor, I'd ask you to limit going back. Let's move forward in light of this motion. Mr. Foreman, you are next.
Thank you. What was the subject? I think I'm in favor of what the direction is going in this. I have a sort of a question of if there is cost involved in this, that it be equally shared. Because in some cases, the one side may acquire some interest in this, which requires a much more legal involvement. And so I would hope to say that if there's an agreement on this, and there's legal involvement in it, which I'm sure it will be, that the cost be shared between the two parties, because we already own and paid for our part of it. And I wouldn't want to see at least a loss to the taxpayer of that amount of money. So that's my comment.
Okay, thank you. I accidentally pushed my button one too many times. I have Mr. Marlar next and Ms. Trammell next. Did I miss anybody? Okay, good. Okay, Mr. Marlar?
Okay, I just wanted to point out a couple of things. So everybody understands, there were two Gene Melvins, okay? I don't know if all of y'all have the deed to the property, but the Gene Melvin and the Royal Melvin in the deed to the property in 1967 was the first Gene Melvin, and then the second Gene Melvin was after that, was with Gene Schultz Melvin. So sometimes it gets convoluted that there were two Gene Melvins at one particular time. Obviously, Mr. Melvin had an affixation with the name Gene, but also, yeah. Also, the one thing that we haven't discussed is, we're talking about this driveway as it exists right now. And no matter what we do, the ADA compliancy and all the other stuff is going to have to come in there. And the drive as it exists might not be there, when we finally get the final plan. And the last thing I want to say, because this is the odd part, we're actually pushing this to another council who will be seated here in just a couple of weeks. I hate to see that happen, but at the same time, I hate to see injustice done to the city or Mr. Destin, because we need to do what's right for the citizens, and the citizens, both private and the public citizens. So as much as I hate it, I still believe that we need to go that direction, even though some of us may not be up here in 2 weeks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Marlar. Ms. Trammell?
Thank you, Mayor. I have three things I need to bring up tonight. First of all, Mr. Bagby questioned about the design modifications. You see what it is now? So far away from where it was. So these are the current plans as we know of them. Secondly, we have Mr. Lockwood Warnett sitting in the audience from Destin Water Users, who can talk about the water line that everybody's talking about. And it's my understanding that was included in the original bid to have it moved.
Yeah, we know
it is not something that we need to consider in this negotiation. It's all been taken care of, but Mr. Warnett's here if anybody has any questions about that. Correct?
And we do know what however the park, it is the secondary transmission line to Holiday Isle, and if we remove any of that cover, we're going to have to work with DW to make sure that line is lowered or so forth. So that's all been, factored into the discussion. So.
Yes, and into the price that we're looking at for doing the park. Third thing I have is that since our last discussion here on council about this topic, I have found out that my son, who is an engineer with Taylor Engineering, has since then entered into a contract with BI Inc. So in that regard, I will have to abstain from any vote on any motion regarding this topic. So I have filled out the appropriate paperwork and just wanted the council to be aware of such.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Trammell. Okay, we do have a motion on the floor by Mr. Destin, seconded by, Mr. Dixon.
Mr. Dixon.
Gotta put him back up here.
Well, that wouldn't fly, would it? Been a long night. We have a motion on the floor by Mr. Dixon, seconded by Mr. Marlar, to have the city staff, city attorneys, and BI Inc. sit one more time to negotiate what we have on the table at present, to renegotiate, and to involve that particular proposal with the Trust for Public Land and DEP, I guess, as well. So,
Mayor, to clarify, that's the city land use attorney?
yeah, BI Inc., I said BI Inc. Well, I didn't say your specific names.
Just wanted to make sure that we get to go.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely.
Mayor?
Yes, sir.
To clarify, that's the city land use attorney.
City Land Use Attorney. Thank you. Okay, I think we're pretty clear on the motion.
Mayor, right now your vote won't show on the screen. You can still take it, and I think electronically it will catch it for you, but we're having some trouble with the visual system, so.
Okay, I will announce it then on this, if that's okay. And then I'll show it to everybody to make sure. Okay, we have that motion on the floor. Let's call for the vote. Okay, we have one abstention, which is Ms. Trammell. Mr. Wood voted no, and the rest are 5 yeses, so that motion passes. Okay, thank you. Now, we will move on. Item number 33, Deepwater Horizon Operation and Maintenance Grant Agreement. Mr. Casella.
Yeah, Mayor and City Council, what you have before you, and I sent an email out last week that the Trust for Public Lands did close on the homesteaded property there of Leonard Destin on Calhoun. As part of that, the city in January had committed that we would accept the new park once it was built. We've been working with the DEP, State of Florida, as relates to the Deepwater Horizon Operation Maintenance Grant Agreement. And if you recall, they were going, in addition to acquiring the land, building the park, they had committed to provide us 10 years worth of operation and maintenance dollars to maintain the new facility. So this agreement is basically, that it was a really refreshing to work with DEP. Our original numbers didn't include a contingency, and they came back to us and asked us to include a contingency because of the fact that they wanted to make sure we had enough money. So we would ask for your authorization to enter into this own agreement, which is, I think is, I'm trying to flip through my pad here, but I think it's about $900,000. 906, which reflects 10 years of O&M to operate the new Leonard Destin Park there on Calhoun. Under this agreement, if we don't spend all those dollars at the end of 10 years, they will make them available to us in years 11 and 12. So we would ask for your authorization of that.
Okay, Ms. Trammell?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll make the recommended motion. I move to approve the Deepwater Horizon Operation and Maintenance Grant Agreement and authorize the mayor to execute the agreement on behalf of the City Council. With pleasure.
Okay. Mr. Wood?
Second.
Okay, discussion. I have one thing I want to ask about this, and I think we do need to go to the Destin family for this item. He was always, in my mind, Captain Leonard Destin, and I don't know what the family preference is for the name of that park. If you wanted to include Captain, it's just probably something non-important, but I just thought I would ask that question. So if you guys want, before we keep going using that name, just to kind of get clarification on whether or not we should do that or not.
I think that would be lovely if it's possible, because, you know, he was a captain all his life.
Right, I agree. Is that?
Yeah, we had, in our conversation with Kate Brown, who has been the point person for the Trust for Public Land, as soon as they closed, they were going to reach out to the Destin family. I don't know if they've done that, but I gave them your, yeah, but we want, in addition to making sure that, you know, Captain Destin is recognized correctly, they want, you know, some of the historical things so we can incorporate it into the design features for the park. So they want to do that. And then we've also asked them to talk with the Fishing Museum, trying to come up with that new seine boat too, that may be a little different than the Primrose, so that we have kind of different vessels for them to look at. So that's all is in the works as we work through it.
Okay, and that way we just get that full name on record as we keep going through this process. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, any other discussion? All right, we have a motion on the floor by Ms. Trammell, seconded by Mr. Wood to approve the Deepwater Horizon Operations and Maintenance Grant Agreement. Let's call for the vote. That passes unanimously. Okay, city manager comments.
Two very quick issues. We talked about it. We will have the ribbon cutting for Hutchinson on the 9th, which is next Wednesday. This Wednesday. Okay. This Wednesday, I'm sorry. At 3 p.m. out on the site where we did the groundbreaking down there on that site. And the reason we're doing it at 3 because to avoid some of the heavy traffic. And then for everybody, the audience, on the 19th, the city will host here is the annual Run with the Dogs. So if you're interested in running with your pet, this is the event to do that. So that's all I have. So.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Casella. Okay, now we will open this up to the public. Anyone wishing to come forward? Mr. Peterson?
Yes, one of the statements I made regarding the encroachment onto the submerged land lease was in error, because I do see that I had looked at 3 drawings, and this most current drawing is not what I was referring to, so I apologize.
Thank you, sir. Okay, anyone else? Mr. Belcher?
Keep you for 30 more seconds. I'm the president-elect for the Destin Rotary Club. Many of you know that we have undertaken the renovation of 908 Airport. Does that ring a bell with anybody? Oh, yeah. But we can't take credit for that. It's been a community effort. I wanted to give the council a quick update. Dixon Kazak, John Kazak, deserves a lot of credit. He has single-handedly helped raise a tremendous amount of funds and donated services. If you've not been to the building, you will not recognize it. It may look like the same shell, but it's not the same building. I doubt there's 20% of that building that's original. The Chambers Destin Forward Group deserves a lot of credit. Once again, another project that they have joined in with to help the community. Last week, their bowling fundraiser raised close to $6,000 towards the project, and so that doesn't always get the credit it deserves. But there are also city employees who have donated their personal time. Some of them have very public positions. Some are in the very highest positions. Some give good counsel. They've all been out there on 40-degree weather days when the wind's blowing and we're tearing down the porch, or we're pulling sheetrock off the ceiling and pulling insulation out. And of all the things going on in the city, not enough gets said about how these people are oftentimes great citizens for the city. And they volunteer their time and effort and have a perfect record of attendance on the 6 work days we've had so far. And so I appreciate that, because it's leadership by example. And I can tell you that it's very difficult to do what we've done. But in 5 months, according to John Kazak, we've done $120,000 worth of renovations to that building. We'll do a work day this Saturday where the landscaping will be complete, the finished cleaning will be done. I think the handrails will go in on the service ramp, and it'll be ready for its CO inspection. And 600 backpacks a week will get packed there for kids who don't have enough to eat. I think that's a tremendous thing to be said about our city. And I appreciate the indulgence of being able to report that. I appreciate the time and efforts the city employees who have volunteered, and the rest of the community who's pulled together to help us. It's been a yeoman's effort, and just thought you should know that.
Thank you, Mr. Belcher. Thank you for your time, too, and your spirit of community. Awesome. Okay, anyone else in the audience? Going once, going twice. How about let's go home? This meeting's adjourned.